You know, your heart is probably the most relentless muscle in your entire body. But have you ever stopped to think about what protects it? What keeps it safe through every single beat, every single day? Today, we are going to talk about its unsung hero, the pericardium.
I mean, just wrap your head around that number for a second. 2.5 billion beats. Through every jump you take, every flight of stairs you climb, and even when you're just sleeping, something has to shield that vital organ from all the chaos happening inside your chest. So, what is it?
Well, the answer is the pericardium. It's this tough yet flexible sac that literally wraps around the heart. And honestly, the best way to think of it is as the heart's own personal bodyguard, on duty 24/7.
Okay, so let's dive into that. To really get what this bodyguard is all about, we gotta look at its job description. What exactly is it doing for the heart, beat by beat?
This thing is a serious multitasker. First off, it's a shock absorber, kind of like the suspension in your car. It also anchors the heart so it doesn't move around too much or overstretch when it fills up with blood. It makes sure the big blood vessels attached to the heart don't get all twisted up. And maybe most importantly, it creates this super smooth, low-friction environment for the heart to beat in, while also walling it off from potential infections. That is one heck of a resume for a single sac.
So you might be wondering, how is this one bodyguard built to do all of those different jobs? Well, it all comes down to a really brilliant two-layered design.
On the outside, you've got the fibrous pericardium. Think of this as the tough, rugged armor. It's the part that gives the heart its protection and keeps it locked in place. But then on the inside, you have the serous pericardium. This is like the silky, frictionless lining inside that suit of armor, and it's all about letting the heart move freely and smoothly. And this diagram shows that setup perfectly. You see that thick, tough outer layer? That's the fibrous armor we were just talking about, providing all that rugged protection. And then, tucked right inside of it, you can see those more delicate serous layers that are all about providing that smooth, gliding surface for the heart. Now that inner serous layer is pretty fascinating. It's actually one single sheet that's folded over on itself. A great way to picture it is to imagine pushing your fist into a slightly deflated balloon. The part of the balloon touching your fist is the visceral layer, and the part on the outside is the parietal layer. And that tiny space in between them, that's the super important pericardial cavity. So what's inside that crucial little space? Get this, just 15 to 20 milliliters of fluid. That is barely a tablespoon. This tiny little bit of pericardial fluid is all it takes to lubricate the surface of the heart for over 2.5 billion beats. It's just absolutely remarkable. But here's the twist. For all its protective genius, this system can go terribly wrong. Sometimes, the bodyguard can turn on the very thing it's sworn to protect. And that's a condition called pericarditis. For a whole bunch of reasons. Could be an infection, could be other medical issues. The pericardium can get inflamed. Basically, the bodyguard gets irritated, and that's when all the trouble starts. See, the problem is that inflammation makes those silky smooth layers get all rough and sticky. So instead of gliding past each other, they start rubbing and scraping with every single heartbeat. It creates this very specific sound a doctor could hear with a stethoscope. It's called a friction rub, and it causes a really sharp chest pain. That silky lining is basically turned into sandpaper. And it gets worse. This inflammation often leads to the next problem, something called a pericardial effusion. Those irritated layers start to produce way too much fluid, and it starts to build up in that little pericardial space. That 1 tablespoon of fluid can quickly become a cupful or sometimes even more. And that leads us to a really critical question. Remember that tough, fibrous armor on the outside, the part that doesn't stretch? Well, what do you think happens when you keep pumping more and more fluid into a container that can't expand? This right here, this is the devastating result. It's a condition called cardiac tamponade. The pressure from all that extra fluid builds up so much that it literally starts to squeeze the heart. The chambers can't fill up with blood properly, which means they can't pump enough blood out to the rest of the body. Your blood pressure plummets, and this quickly becomes a life-threatening medical emergency. The bodyguard is now suffocating the heart it's supposed to protect. But even when the bodyguard turns into the enemy, modern medicine has a way to step in and save the day. The solution is a procedure called pericardiocentesis, and it's a very direct answer to a very direct problem. You've got to get that dangerous, excess fluid out of there and take the pressure off the heart. The whole process is actually pretty logical.
First, the patient is positioned in a way that brings the heart a little closer to the chest wall. Then, usually with an ultrasound to see exactly what's happening, a physician carefully guides a needle into that fluid-filled pericardial space, and as soon as that fluid starts to get drawn out, the pressure on the heart is relieved almost instantly. It's incredible.
And here you can see that exact life-saving moment. The needle goes right through that tough outer sac to get to the fluid that's causing all the trouble. By giving that fluid an escape route, the pressure is released and the heart is finally free to beat properly again.
So let's end on this thought. The pericardium is just this perfect, fascinating example of a system in our body where the very thing designed for protection can, under the wrong circumstances, become the greatest threat. It really makes you wonder, what other bodyguards in our biology, like maybe our own immune system, have that same powerful dual nature? It's definitely something to think about.